Hey guys. Tonight we are traveling back nearly 2,000 years to the shimmering coastline of Roman Egypt. But not to the pyramids or the tombs of the pharaohs. No, we are heading to the crown jewel of the Mediterranean, the city of Alexandria, where science and magic were basically the same thing. It was a place of white limestone, infinite scrolls, and engineers who played with the elements like children with toys. You might not survive the first day, mostly because the street food is questionable and the chariot traffic is genuinely terrifying, but it is quite a view. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. It's strangely comforting to know who else is falling asleep to the sound of ancient gears. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are standing on the deck of a merchant vessel, a sturdy Rhodes-built galley laden with wine and olive oil, as it cuts through the turquoise waters of the Mediterranean. The air is thick with the scent of salt and the distant, earthy perfume of the Nile Delta. Ahead of you, the horizon isn't just a flat line of blue. It is interrupted by a jagged white finger of stone reaching up to touch the clouds. This is the Pharos, the great lighthouse of Alexandria. And as you get closer, the sheer scale of it begins to make your stomach do a little somersault. It is one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and standing at over 100 meters tall, it is effectively the world's first skyscraper. The sun reflects off its white limestone blocks with such intensity that you have to squint, protecting your eyes from the glare that guided sailors home for centuries. As the ship maneuvers toward the Portus Magnus, the great harbor, you can see the 3 distinct tiers of the lighthouse: a massive square base, a middle octagonal section, and a circular top where the great fire burns at night. Most people think of ancient Egypt as a land of dusty mystery, but here, under the Roman administration of the 1st century CE, you are standing in the most modern city on earth. It was founded by Alexander the Great back in 331 BCE, but by the time you step off this boat, it has become a sprawling, multicultural powerhouse of nearly 1 million people. This is a mainstream historical fact that most students learn, but standing here, feeling the vibrations of the oars through the soles of your sandals, it feels less like a history lesson and more like a living, breathing machine. You look up at the very top of the Pharos and notice a massive bronze statue of Poseidon, or perhaps Zeus, watching over the sailors. There is a persistent whisper among the crew that the great mirror inside the lantern, a polished bronze surface used to reflect sunlight by day and fire by night, could be used as a weapon to set enemy ships ablaze. While that sounds like something out of a comic book, an obscure bit of trivia is that the Pharos was so famous that its name eventually became the root word for lighthouse in almost every Romance language. In French it is phare, in Spanish pharaoh, and in Italian pharaoh as well. It wasn't just a building, it was a brand. You watch as a string of donkeys winds its way up a massive internal spiral ramp, carrying bundles of wood to the summit to keep the beacon alive. Interestingly, historians still debate exactly how that fuel was moved. Some argue for this donkey ramp, while others suggest a sophisticated pulley system or even a primitive elevator might have been hidden within the masonry to keep the fire fed without exhausting the animals. The ship glides past the Heptast, the massive 7-stayed mole or causeway that connects the mainland to the island of Pharos. You can hear the sounds of the city beginning to swell, a chaotic symphony of Greek, Egyptian, Latin, and Hebrew. It is a linguistic stew that mirrors the architecture around you. To your left, the royal quarter rises with its sprawling palaces and manicured gardens, while to your right, the industrial docks are a hive of activity where crane-like machines, powered by men walking in giant wooden wheels, hoist heavy crates of papyrus and grain. You feel a slight bump as the galley finally nudges against the cedarwood docks. The sailors begin to shout, throwing heavy hemp ropes to the dock workers, who move with a practiced, rhythmic grace. You step off the gangplank and your feet hit solid ground, or at least, as solid as the reclaimed land of a harbor can be. The heat hits you differently here. It's a dry baking warmth that carries the dust of 1,000 years of construction. You find yourself standing in a crowd that makes a modern subway station look empty. There are Roman legionaries in polished breastplates, their red cloaks dusty from the march. There are merchants from the east draped in silks that catch the light like oil on water. And there are scholars, easily identified by their ink-stained fingers and the distracted looks on their faces as they mutter geometry to themselves. You take a deep breath, and the air is a mixture of roasted chickpeas, expensive incense, and the briny, slightly fishy smell of the harbor. It's overwhelming, but in a way that feels full of possibility. You aren't just in a city. You are in the brain of the ancient world. Somewhere in these grid-like streets, a man named Hero is currently tinkering with a brass sphere that will eventually change the way we think about the power of steam. But for now, you are just a traveler with sore legs and a curious mind, walking toward the shadows of the great colonnades to find some shade. The lighthouse is behind you now, its shadow stretching long across the water like a giant sundial, marking the hours of a day that feels like it could last forever. You adjust your tunic, feeling the grit of the sea salt against your skin, and begin to walk toward the center of the city. The limestone paving stones beneath your feet are worn smooth by the millions of people who have walked this path before you. From kings to slaves, you realize that in Alexandria, even the ground tells a story of ambition. You pass a small shrine where a priest is pouring a libation, the wine disappearing into the thirsty cracks of the stone. You find yourself wondering if the gods are actually watching, or if they, too, are just impressed by the engineering of the humans who built this place. The transition from the sea to the city is complete, and as you turn the corner into the first great plaza, the true scale of Alexandria opens up before you, a world of white marble and endless noise, waiting to be explored. You leave the briny humidity of the harbor behind and step into the sunlight of the most famous road in the world, the Street of Canopus. If you were expecting the narrow, winding, claustrophobic alleys of Rome or the messy, organic sprawl of Athens, you're in for a shock. Alexandria was a city designed by architects who possessed a very healthy obsession with straight lines. It was built on a grid system, a mainstream historical fact attributed to the planning of Dimocrates, who followed the Hippodamian style. This means the city is organized like a giant chessboard, with streets crossing at perfect right angles. As you stand at the threshold of this massive thoroughfare, you realize it is nearly 30 meters wide, about the size of a modern 8-lane highway. Imagine that. 2,000 years ago, an era of horse-drawn carts and sandals. And they had roads wider than many of our city boulevards today. The Street of Canopus stretches for miles, cutting the city in half from east to west. On either side, you are shielded from the sun by majestic, white marble colonnades. These covered walkways are a godsend, providing a cool, shaded path for pedestrians like you to avoid the absolute chaos of the center lane. And trust me, you want to stay in the shade. The center of the street is a high-speed zone for chariots, and Roman chariot drivers were essentially the ancient version of angry taxi drivers. They don't have brakes, they certainly don't have mirrors, and they have a very liberal interpretation of right-of-way. You watch a gilded chariot streak past, the driver yelling at a slow-moving donkey cart in a dialect of Greek that sounds suspiciously like a string of curses. It's comforting to know that road rage is a timeless human tradition. As you walk, the air begins to shift. It's no longer just salt and fish. It's a dizzying cocktail of the world's most expensive smells. Alexandria was the terminal for the Silk Road and the incense routes of Arabia. You pass a stall where heaps of frankincense and myrrh sit in open wicker baskets. They're heavy. Sweet smoke rising from small charcoal burners to mask the less pleasant sense of a million people living in close quarters. Next to it, a merchant from the east is unrolling a bolt of silk so thin it looks like liquid moonlight. Believers in a good bargain are haggling in at least 4 different languages at once. An obscure bit of trivia you might find interesting is that the Strait of Canopus was specifically aligned by the city's founders to catch the Etesian winds, the cool northern breezes from the Mediterranean. This created a natural air conditioning system for the city, funneling the sea air through the grid to keep the inhabitants from quite literally baking in the Egyptian sun. The multiculturalism here is almost dizzying. You rub shoulders with Nabatean traders in colorful woolen tunics, Indian merchants who have traveled months by ship and caravan, and locals dressed in traditional Egyptian linen, their eyes lined with heavy black coal to protect against the sun's glare. You notice that the street is impeccably clean, at least by ancient standards. There is a sophisticated drainage system hidden beneath the limestone slabs, another marvel of Alexandrian engineering. However, historians still debate the exact location of the most famous landmark along this road, the Soma, or the tomb of Alexander the Great. It was said to be located at the crossroads where the Strait of Canopus met the city's second largest thoroughfare, the Paneum. Every king and emperor, from Julius Caesar to Augustus, came here to pay their respects to Alexander's mummified body. Yet today, we have no idea where it actually lies. It's the ultimate archaeological cold case, buried somewhere beneath the modern asphalt and tall buildings of the current city. You find yourself getting a bit hungry, so you stop at a street vendor who is frying something in a large copper vat. He hands you a small cone of papyrus filled with roasted beans and pieces of fried dough drizzled with honey and sesame seeds. It's delicious, though you try not to think too much about the oil, which looks like it hasn't been changed since the reign of Cleopatra. You lean against a fluted marble column, watching the tide of humanity flow past. Above the shops, there are balconies draped with vibrant tapestries and hanging plants. You see a pet monkey sitting on a railing, meticulously peeling a stolen grape and throwing the skin at a passing legionary. The soldier doesn't even flinch. In Alexandria, a grape-throwing monkey is probably the least strange thing he'll see all day. Continuing your walk, you realize that the Strait of Canopus isn't just a road. It's a living museum of the Roman Empire's wealth. Every few hundred meters, you pass a grand public fountain, nymphaeum where water gushes from the mouths of bronze lions into basins of cool, clear water. People aren't just drinking. They are gathering to talk. This is the social media of the 1st century. If you want to know who is winning the grain wars in Rome, or which philosopher has just been kicked out of the library for being too loud, this is where you go. You overhear a group of young students arguing passionately about the nature of the vacuum, a topic that seems incredibly boring, until you realize that in Alexandria, proving the existence of empty space was the key to unlocking the power of the universe. The scale of the buildings is starting to make your neck ache. You pass the entrance to the Heron, a massive temple started by Cleopatra for her lover Mark Antony and finished by Augustus for himself. 2 enormous granite obelisks stand at the entrance, shipped here from Heliopolis. Interestingly, these very obelisks survived the destruction of the city and now stand in London and New York, known as Cleopatra's Needles. Standing here in the year 70 CE, you see them as they were meant to be, polished, vibrant, and surrounded by the hum of a superpower at its peak. You feel small, but in a comfortable way, like a single drop of water in a vast, glittering ocean of history. As the sun begins to dip lower, casting the long, fluted shadows of the columns across the white paving stones, you realize you are approaching the crossroads. The crowd becomes even thicker, the noise a little louder. You can smell the scent of old paper and cedarwood drifting on the breeze from a few blocks away. You are nearing the district of the scholars, the place where the world's books are kept, and where the city's cleverest minds spend their days, arguing about things that don't exist yet. The street of Canopus has brought you to the heart of human knowledge, and as the light turns a soft, golden ochre, you prepare to turn off the main road and find the quiet, dusty halls of the great library. You leave the thunder of chariot wheels and the shouting of frankincense merchants behind as you turn into the Brauchian, the royal district of the city. Suddenly, the volume of Alexandria drops by several decibels. It's like stepping out of a busy city street and into the hushed, carpeted lobby of a very expensive hotel. Here, the air doesn't smell like fried dough or donkey sweat. It smells like cedarwood, dried reeds, and the faint, bitter tang of iron gall ink. You are approaching the great library of Alexandria, the ultimate temple of the mind, in an age before the internet, before printing presses, and before your phone could tell you the capital of a country you can't pronounce. This was the central server for the entire human race. If a piece of information existed, whether it was a recipe for lentil soup or a mathematical proof for the circumference of the earth, it was probably sitting in a pigeonhole somewhere in this building. As you walk through the monumental entrance, flanked by statues of the muses, you realize that the library isn't just one building with a quiet please sign. It is a sprawling complex of lecture halls, laboratories, gardens, and dining rooms. It's more like a modern university campus, where the professors never actually have to go home. You see scholars walking in pairs through the peristyle, their heads bowed in deep conversation, their white linen robes rustling against the marble floors. One of them looks like he hasn't slept since the last lunar eclipse. His hair is a bird's nest of tangles, and he is frantically scribbling on a small wax tablet with a stylus. You try to catch a glimpse of what he's writing, but it looks like a chaotic jumble of Greek letters and triangles. You give him a wide berth. Alexandria is famous for its mad geniuses, and you'd rather not get recruited as a lab assistant for an experiment involving boiling lead. A mainstream historical fact that never fails to impress is the sheer scale of the collection here. At its height, the library was estimated to hold between 500,000 and 700,000 scrolls. To put that in perspective, that's hundreds of miles of papyrus. But how did they get all these books? Well, Alexandria had a very aggressive, and frankly quite rude, acquisition policy. An obscure and rather cheeky bit of trivia is the law of the ships. When any vessel entered the harbor of Alexandria, Roman and Egyptian guards wouldn't just look for smuggled wine or contraband spices. They searched for books. If they found a scroll that the library didn't have, they would seize it, take it to the scriptorium to be copied. And then, in a move that would make any modern librarian gasp, they would keep the original and give the disappointed traveler the copy. It was basically state-sponsored literary piracy. You imagine a poor merchant trying to explain to his wife back in Rhodes why he no longer has his favorite poetry book. The guards took it, honey. But hey, look at this fresh papyrus copy they gave me. You step into the great hall, and the scale of the room makes you feel like a tiny insect. The walls are lined with thousands of armario, wooden cupboards, or niches where the scrolls are kept. Each scroll is rolled around a central wooden stick and tucked into a protective leather sleeve, with a small tag called a syllabus hanging off the end to identify the title and author. It looks like a giant, ancient wine rack, but instead of fermented grapes, it's filled with fermented thoughts. You watch a librarian, an elderly man with thick-rimmed bronze spectacles perched on his nose, gliding up a tall wooden ladder to retrieve a specific work by Euripides. He handles the scroll with a reverence that borders on the religious. Interestingly, historians still debate the exact organization of this massive archive. While many credit the scholar Callimachus with creating the Pine, a 120-volume catalog that essentially invented the concept of the library system, Others argue over whether the scrolls were sorted by genre, author, or simply by the date they were borrowed from a confused ship captain. The silence here is heavy, almost physical. It's a warm, dusty silence that feels like it's pressing against your ears. You find a quiet corner and sit on a stone bench, watching the dust motes dance in the shafts of sunlight that slant down from the high, narrow windows. There is no humming of computers, no clicking of keyboards, just the soft, rhythmic scratching of reed pens, the calamus on papyrus. You notice a young scribe nearby, his tongue poking out of the corner of his mouth as he meticulously copies a medical treatise. If he makes one mistake, he has to scrape the ink off with a piece of pumice or start the entire sheet over. It's a slow, agonizing process that makes you appreciate the delete key more than you ever thought possible. But the Great Library wasn't just a place for reading. It was the world's first think tank. In the nearby dining hall, provided for the scholars by the state, men like Eratosthenes, who calculated the Earth's size with terrifying accuracy using nothing but shadows, and Aristarchus, who dared to suggest the Earth revolved around the sun, ate together and argued over dinner. You can almost hear the ghostly echoes of their debates bouncing off the marble walls. However, a darker cloud hangs over this place in the mind of any historian. The destruction of the library is one of history's greatest tragedies. Yet historians still fiercely debate who was actually responsible. Was it Julius Caesar accidentally burning the docks in 48 BCE? Was it a mob of angry zealots in the 4th century? Or did it simply fade away due to budget cuts and neglect? Some scholars argue that the burning of the library is more of a myth than a single event, a slow, painful decline of a civilization that stopped valuing its own memory. You stand up, your legs a bit stiff from the cold stone bench, and walk toward the exit. As you leave the Brauchen, you feel a strange sense of loss. Even though the library is still very much alive in your current timeline, you realize that you are standing in a reservoir of human potential that could have kick-started the Industrial Revolution 1,000 years early, if only the right people had talked to each other. You adjust your tunic and step back out into the bright Alexandrian afternoon. The transition from the world of books back to the world of people is jarring. The noise of the city rushes back in a wave of shouting, cartwheels, and distant music. But you carry the scent of the papyrus with you, a dusty perfume of the past. You are heading toward the Mosean. Now, the Temple of the Muses, where the theories you just saw in ink are being turned into physical, clanking reality. The gears are turning, and you can almost feel the air itself beginning to vibrate with the tension of a world on the verge of a breakthrough. You step out of the quiet, scroll-lined shadows of the library and into the sprawling gardens of the Moseon. This is the Temple of the Muses. And while our modern word museum comes directly from this place, don't expect to see velvet ropes or glass cases filled with dusty pottery. In the 1st century, the Moseon is a high-octane research institute, a sprawling state-funded sanctuary where the smartest people in the Mediterranean are paid to do nothing but think, argue, and occasionally remember to eat. It is an extension of the royal palaces, a place of lush greenery, bubbling fountains, and shaded walkways designed to keep the brain cool while the ideas get hot. You see a group of astronomers sitting on a marble bench, gesturing wildly at a celestial globe. One of them is shouting about the angle of the sun at the summer solstice, while another is busy drawing a diagram in the dirt with his toe. It feels like a university campus during finals week, but without the caffeine or the laptops. A mainstream historical fact that defines this place is that the Moseon was the world's first truly international research center. Scholars were invited by the Ptolemaic kings, and later the Roman emperors. From across the known world, Greek mathematicians, Egyptian astronomers, and Jewish philosophers all shared the same dining hall. They were given free housing, free food, and a decent salary, all so they could focus on the purity of knowledge. You walk past the communal refectory, where the smell of boiled lentils and roasted garlic is wafting out into the garden. You notice a scholar sitting alone under a palm tree, a bowl of soup cooling beside him, completely untouched. He is staring into a small glass vial, watching how a drop of oil behaves in water. You get the sense that if the building behind him caught fire, he'd probably just take notes on the color of the flames before thinking about running. An obscure and slightly hilarious bit of trivia is that the rest of the world wasn't always impressed by these pampered geniuses. Timon of Phlius, a skeptical philosopher, once mockingly described the scholars of the Mausian as the well-fed birds in the cage of the muses. He was essentially calling them overpriced pets who spent all their time chirping at each other in a golden prison, and looking at them now, wandering through these perfect gardens in their clean white tunics. You can see his point. They are living in a bubble of luxury, shielded from the harsh realities of the Alexandrian streets by palace walls and imperial favor. But these birds are currently laying the eggs of modern science. You pass a lecture hall where a doctor is explaining the nervous system, using a diagram that is surprisingly accurate for a time when most people believed the heart did all the thinking. As you wander deeper into the complex, you realize that the Mausian is a labyrinth of intellectual silos. In one room, poets are arguing over the perfect meter for a hymn to Apollo. In the next, engineers are debating the torque of a catapult string. However, a point that historians still fiercely debate is the exact physical relationship between the Mausian and the Great Library. Some scholars believe they were two distinct buildings connected by a walkway, while others argue that the library was actually a department inside the Mausian, much like a library is part of a modern university. Because no archaeological remains of either have been found under the modern city of Alexandria, we are left to piece together their layout from the vague descriptions of ancient travelers, who were more interested in the gossip than the floor plans. The atmosphere here is one of intense, quiet energy. It's the sound of 1,000 stylus pens scratching on wax and the low murmur of men trying to explain the unexplainable. You find yourself walking along a portico where the walls are painted with vibrant frescoes of the Muses Calliope with her tablets, Urania with her globe. You feel the weight of expectation in the air. This is a place where eureka moments happen in the middle of a nap. You see a young man, likely a student, running toward a group of elders, clutching a piece of parchment and looking like he's just discovered a new planet. They dismiss him with a wave of their hands, probably telling him to go check his math for the 10th time. Science here is a slow grinding process of peer review, and the well-fed birds are very picky about who gets to join the flock. You take a seat by a fountain, the water splashing softly into a basin carved from blue-flecked granite. The sun is warm on your shoulders, and the gentle hum of the city beyond the walls feels like a distant memory. It is strangely peaceful to be surrounded by so much intelligence. You start to think about the people back home, living their lives based on superstition and old wives' tales. While here, the secrets of the vacuum, the steam, and the stars are being picked apart like knots in a string. You realize that the Mausian is the bridge between the mystical past and a mechanical future. It's a place where a god isn't just a statue, but a question to be solved. You notice a man walking toward a row of smaller, more industrial-looking buildings on the edge of the gardens. He doesn't look like the other scholars. His tunic is stained with soot, and he has a burn mark on his forearm that he keeps absent-mindedly scratching. He isn't carrying a scroll. He's carrying a heavy brass cylinder. This is Hero's territory. While the astronomers are looking at the sky, the engineers in the mechanical quarter of the Mausian are looking at the ground, at the fire, and at the way water moves through pipes. The polished marble of the gardens gives way to the gritty reality of workshops, and the smell of jasmine is replaced by the sharp, metallic temps of the forge. You stand up and follow the man with the soot-stained tunic. The transition is sharp, like moving from a gallery to a factory. The quiet intellectualism of the gardens is being drowned out by the rhythmic clack-clack of hammers and the hiss of escaping steam. You are leaving the world of theory and entering the world of the machine. The scholars in the cage might be the brains, but the men in these smoke-filled rooms are the hands. As you approach the heavy oak doors of the workshop, you feel a vibration in the ground, a rhythmic thumping that sounds like the heartbeat of a hidden giant. You take a deep breath, push the door open, and step into the clutter of the most advanced laboratory in the ancient world. You push the heavy oak doors open, and the first thing that hits you isn't the heat, but the smell. It's a dense, dizzying aroma of scorched olive oil, pine resin, and the sharp metallic tang of cold brass. If the Mausian Gardens were a sanctuary of silence, this workshop is a sanctuary of noise. You step inside and immediately almost trip over a pile of lead pipes that have been bent into shapes that look like a confused octopus. The room is a masterpiece of organized chaos. Imagine a garage where the owner hasn't thrown anything away since the Bronze Age, but everything is made of expensive metal and sits on a bed of fine white charcoal dust. There are no scrolls neatly tucked away here. Instead, the walls are lined with wooden shelves groaning under the weight of bronze spheres, wax molds, and strange, interlocking gears that look far too precise for a world that hasn't invented the screwdriver yet. You carefully navigate a path between two massive stone workbenches. To your left, a small furnace is glowing a dull, angry red, its bellows operated by a slow-moving water wheel outside the window. You see a man huddled over a low table in the corner, his back to you. He is wearing a tunic that was probably white at some point in the distant past but is now a dappled masterpiece of soot and oil. He doesn't notice you because he is currently having a very intense conversation with a large copper pot sitting over a small brazier. He is muttering something about the pneuma, the spirit or breath of the air, and tapping the lid of the pot with a small iron rod. Stay down, he whispers, as the lid begins to rattle with a rhythmic metallic chatter. You realize that this is Hero, the man whose name will eventually be synonymous with the birth of mechanical engineering, though at this moment, he looks less like a visionary and more like a cook whose dinner is trying to escape. A mainstream historical fact that defines Hero's career is that he was the Leonardo da Vinci of the ancient world. Writing in the mid-1st century CE, historians pinned down his timeline specifically to around 62 CE, thanks to a lunar eclipse he mentioned in his records. Hero was the ultimate tinkerer. He didn't just build things. He wrote the manuals. His works, like the Pneumatica and Automata, are the world's first how-to guides for building machines that move by themselves. However, a point that historians still fiercely debate is Hero's actual status within the academic hierarchy of Alexandria. Was he a respected professor of the Mausian, or was he more of a freelance special effects consultant for the city's temples? Some scholars argue he was a pure theoretician who used these gadgets to prove physical laws, while others believe he was essentially the ancient world's most sophisticated magician, hired to create miracles that kept the local populations in a state of holy awe. As you stand there, watching him talk to his pot, you notice a strange contraption on the bench next to him. It's a bronze vessel with a slit at the top and a small spout at the bottom. An obscure and rather quirky bit of trivia is that Hero actually invented the world's first vending machine. If you were a thirsty worshiper at a temple, you didn't have to wait for a priest. You just dropped a 5 drachma coin into the slot. The weight of the coin would hit a lever inside, which would pull a plug and dispense a measured amount of holy water. It's a bit depressing to realize that pataplay technology is nearly 2,000 years old. But looking at the brass mechanism, you can't help but admire the cold, mechanical logic of it. Hero finally looks up, startled by your presence. His eyes are bright, rimmed with the red fatigue of someone who hasn't seen the sun in several days. He doesn't ask for your name. He just points at the pot. "Do you see it?" he asks. The nothingness is getting angry. He is referring to the vacuum, or rather, the expansion of steam. He lifts the lid of the pot, and a cloud of white vapor hisses out, momentarily obscuring his face. You realize that in this room, air isn't just something you breathe. It's a fluid, a spring, a force that can be compressed and released. Hero moves to another part of the workshop, stepping over a pile of discard gears with a grace that comes from knowing exactly where the junk is. He picks up a small hollow brass sphere with two bent nozzles sticking out of it. This is the Aeolipile, the ball of Aeolus, to us. It's a primitive steam turbine, to him. It's a philosophical toy meant to demonstrate the properties of air and heat. He hasn't thought about putting it on a set of wheels or using it to grind grain. He's just fascinated by the way it spins when you boil water underneath it. The workshop is filled with the ghosts of machines that almost changed the world. You see a set of pulleys connected to a miniature stage, where tiny wooden figures are frozen mid-dance. You see a wind vane, connected to a series of pipes that looks suspiciously like it could play a melody if the breeze was right. There is a sense of untapped power here that is almost overwhelming. You realize that the difference between this first-century workshop and an 18th-century factory is just a matter of intent. Hero has the physics, he has the metallurgy, and he certainly has the imagination. What he doesn't have is the social need for labor-saving devices. Why build a steam engine to do the work of 100 men when the Roman Empire has 100 men available for the price of a few loaves of bread? It's a sobering thought that stalls the gears of progress more effectively than any lack of genius. Hero gestures for you to follow him to a large wooden box in the center of the room. It's covered in a linen sheet. He pulls the sheet away with the flourish of a man who knows he's about to impress you. Underneath is a miniature temple made of painted wood and gilded brass. He lights a small charcoal fire on a miniature altar on top of the box. For a moment, nothing happens. Then, with a slow, ghostly creak, the heavy temple doors begin to swing open all by themselves. There is no one pulling a string, no priest hiding in a closet. It's just the fire and the air. Hero smiles, a small, weary grin. "The gods like it when we help them look impressive," he mutters. You realize that you are looking at the centerpiece of his work, the integration of mechanics into the religious life of the city. You take a step back, the heat of the forge beginning to make your head swim. The workshop feels like a bubble of the future sitting in the middle of the past. You look at the soot on Hero's hands and the precision of the brass gears, and you feel a strange sense of vertigo. You are standing at the exact moment where humanity figured out how to make things move without muscles, but decided to use it to open doors instead of moving mountains. As the sun begins to set outside the high, grime-streaked windows, the shadows of the machines stretch across the floor like long metallic fingers. Hero turns back to his boiling pot, the Aeolipile beginning to hiss on the table. The transition from the world of scrolls to the world of fire is complete. You are about to see the miracles themselves in action, beginning with the mechanical birds that sing without a throat. Hero wipes a smudge of soot from his forehead and leads you toward a corner of the workshop that is surprisingly bright. Here, the heavy smell of the forge is slightly dampened by the fresh, cool scent of running water. Sitting on a pedestal of polished cedar is a sight that seems entirely too delicate for a room filled with bent lead and charcoal. It is a miniature grove of trees, but the leaves are hammered from thin sheets of copper, and the branches are intricate brass pipes. Perched upon these metallic limbs are several small birds, sparrows, blackbirds, and thrushes crafted with such detail that you can see the individual barbs on their feathers. They are frozen in a silent tableau. But as Hero pulls a small lever at the base of the machine, the entire grove seems to shudder with life. Suddenly, The room is filled with a chorus of chirping. It isn't the tinny, artificial sound you might expect from a mechanical toy. It is a complex, warbling melody that perfectly mimics the song of a garden bird. The sparrows' beaks open and close in sync with the notes, and their tiny wings flutter as if they are about to take flight. A mainstream historical fact that makes this even more impressive is that Hero was using the principles of hydraulics and pneumatics to create the world's first biomimetic robots. He wasn't using electricity or digital recordings, obviously. He was using the weight and movement of water to displace air through a series of tiny hidden whistles. Each bird had a different sized pipe inside its throat, tuned to a specific pitch. So when the air was forced through, it created the illusion of a living, breathing song. You lean in closer, trying to spot the trick. Beneath the pedestal, you can hear a rhythmic gurgling, like a gentle stream flowing over rocks. Hero points to a large, airtight bronze vessel hidden in the base. The water falls, he explains, and as it fills the chamber, it chases the air out. An obscure and slightly eerie bit of trivia about this specific machine is the owl and the singing birds sequence. On the opposite side of the grove sits a small, stoic metal owl. Every few minutes, as the water level shifts, a hidden gear turns the owl's head to face the smaller birds. The moment the owl looks at them, the singing birds go instantly silent, their beaks snapping shut in a display of mechanical fear. When the owl turns away, the chirping cautiously resumes. It's a sophisticated piece of behavioral programming, written in brass and water, meant to delight in, perhaps slightly unnerve, the elite of Alexandria. As you watch the owl slowly pivot on its axis, you realize that Hero's grasp of timing was impeccable. He understood that a machine shouldn't just do something. It should tell a story. However, a point that historians still fiercely debate is the intended setting for these masterpieces. Were they designed as public spectacles to be placed in the center of the Mausian gardens for everyone to see, or were they exclusive, limited edition luxuries for the private villas of Roman governors? Some scholars argue that Hero's birds were the first-century equivalent of a high-end home theater system, something you'd show off to your guests after a long dinner to prove just how much money and taste you had. Others suggest they were part of a larger sacred grove in a temple, used to convince the common people that the gods could breathe life into cold metal whenever they pleased. You reach out and touch one of the copper leaves. It's surprisingly cold, but the vibration of the water moving through the branch beneath it makes it feel oddly like a pulse. It's a strange sensation, standing in the middle of an ancient city, while listening to a choir of metal animals. You wonder what the common people of the time made of this. For most Romans, a bird that sang without eating was either a miracle or black magic. But here in the workshop, it's just physics. Hero doesn't see it as a miracle. He sees it as a flowchart. He adjusts a small screw on the owl's neck, and the bird turns with a soft, satisfied click. The transition from the chaotic noise of the streets to the engineered melody of these birds is a reminder that Alexandria was a place where humanity was trying to housebreak the laws of nature. Interestingly, the technology behind these birds survived much longer than the library itself. The concept of the hydraulic organ and singing automata traveled through the centuries, eventually influencing the clockmakers of the Renaissance and the inventors of the Enlightenment. But standing here now, in the 1st century, you aren't thinking about the future. You are just watching a metal sparrow tilt its head. You notice that Hero has another machine nearby. One that doesn't involve water at all. It sits by the window, catching the afternoon breeze. It's a series of tall, slender pipes connected to a horizontal wheel with small sails. As a gust of wind catches the sails, the wheel begins to spin, and a low, haunting drone begins to fill the room. It sounds like a ghost trying to learn how to play a flute. Hero leaves the singing birds to finish their cycle and walks toward this new device. He looks out the window at the white limestone. buildings of the city in size. The air wants to be heard, he says. You follow him, leaving the gurgling water and the copper grove behind. The chirping fades into a rhythmic hiss as the water chamber empties, and the birds settle back into their metallic slumber. The transition is seamless. You move from the world of water to the world of the wind. The clack-clack of the forge has stopped for the day, and the only sound now is the eerie air-driven melody of Hero's wind organ. It feels like the workshop itself is breathing. You look at the sails spinning in the window and realize that for Hero, every element, fire, water, air's just a different kind of fuel. You are standing in a room where the wind isn't just a breeze, it's a musician. And as the drone of the pipes deepens, you realize that tonight's journey into the mechanical heart of the past is only getting stranger. You prepare yourself for the next wonder, wondering how many more voices Hero has hidden in the silence of his brass and wood. The warbling of the copper birds slowly dies down into a series of soft, mechanical clicks, leaving a ringing silence in the workshop that is quickly filled by a new, more somber sound. It's a low, resonant drone that seems to vibrate in the very marrow of your bones. You turn away from the metallic grove and follow Hero toward the large, arched window that overlooks the harbor. There, sitting on a sturdy oak frame, is a machine that looks like a cross between a small ship's rigging and a church organ. A vertical axle rises from a wooden base, topped with 4 small, canvas-covered sails that are currently catching the brisk northern breeze blowing in from the Mediterranean. As the sails spin, they drive a piston that pumps air into a large wooden chest, which in turn feeds a row of bronze pipes of varying lengths. This is Hero's wind organ, and as the wind gusts, it begins to play a series of haunting, minor key chords that drift out over the rooftops of Alexandria. A mainstream historical fact that often catches people off guard is that this specific device is the very first documented instance in human history of a wind-powered machine. Before Hero's wind organ, wind was something you used to push a boat or winnow grain by hand. But it wasn't something you harnessed to do mechanical work. You are standing at the birth of wind power, an innovation that wouldn't truly take off for another 1,000 years with the arrival of the windmill. To Hero, however, this isn't a tool for grinding flour or pumping water. It's a way to turn the invisible breath of the world into music. You watch the sails whirl, a blur of white linen against the blue sky, and you realize that Hero has effectively created the world's first ambient soundtrack. It's a bit like an ancient wind-driven synthesizer, playing a melody that no human hand is touching. You lean against the cool stone of the window frame, watching the rhythmic movement of the wooden levers that connect the sails to the air pump. The sound is eerie, a bit like the wind howling through a mountain pass, but with a structured, mathematical beauty to it. Hero stands beside you, his soot-streaked face illuminated by the afternoon sun. He isn't looking at the sails. He's listening to the pitch of the bronze pipes. An obscure and rather grim bit of trivia is that the water organ, or hydraulis, the wind organ's older, more common cousin, was a favorite fixture at the Roman amphitheaters. While gladiators were busy trying to dismantle each other in the sand below, a musician would be off to the side, frantically pumping a water organ to provide a dramatic high-energy soundtrack to the carnage. It's a strange thought. The same technology used here for a peaceful garden melody was used in the Colosseum to hype up a crowd of 80,000 people during the execution. The wind organ Hero has built is much smaller and more delicate than the stadium-sized monsters found in Rome. It's meant for a courtyard or a private terrace, a way to let nature perform for the inhabitants of a house. However, a point that historians still fiercely debate is whether this wind organ was ever actually built in Hero's lifetime, or if it remained a brilliant paper invention in his book, The New. Because papyrus is fragile, and brass is often melted down by later generations to make coins or spearheads, we have no archaeological evidence of a first-century windwheel. Some scholars argue that the technology to create a functioning gear linkage between a wind vane and an air pump was simply too advanced for the era, while others point to the Antikythera mechanism, complex astronomical computer from the same period, as proof that Hero's peers were more than capable of such precision. Standing here, watching the sails actually spin and hearing the pipes actually groan, the debate feels almost silly. The machine is right in front of you, its gears humming with a quiet, efficient confidence. You reach out and feel the vibration of the air chest. It's warm from the friction of the wooden piston. And you can feel the rhythmic thumpus of the air being forced through the bronze valves. It's a strangely hypnotic experience. In a world where every sound is made by a human, an animal, or a natural disaster, hearing a structured melody produced by a machine feels almost supernatural. You realize that for Hero, the wind isn't just a weather pattern. It's a source of kinetic energy waiting to be organized. You imagine a city filled with these organs, a metropolis that sings whenever the breeze picks up. It would be beautiful, or perhaps incredibly annoying after about 20 minutes, depending on your musical taste. Hero reaches out and adjusts a small wooden peg on one of the pipes, shifting the note from a sharp, mournful wail to a softer, more rounded tone. He seems satisfied, though he quickly loses interest as the wind dies down and the organ's song fades into a quiet, metallic wheeze. He isn't interested in the performance. He's interested in the proof. Once the pipes stop vibrating, the machine is just a collection of wood and cloth again. He turns away from the window, his mind already racing toward the next application of his pneuma theories. You find yourself lingering by the sails for a moment longer, watching the white linen flutter as the last of the Mediterranean breeze disappears. The harbor below is a hive of activity, ships coming and going, unaware that a few stories above them, the future of energy has just been demonstrated and then promptly ignored. The transition from the wind organ back into the dim interior of the workshop is jarring. The eerie, ethereal music is replaced by the smell of stagnant water and the sight of a heavy brass vessel sitting on a low tripod. This next device looks far more practical, and perhaps a bit more cynical, than the wind organ. It's a large ornate urn with a small coin slot at the top. You realize that you've moved from the world of artistic toys into the world of cold, hard commerce. Hero picks up a small bronze coin from a tray and tosses it toward you. "Try it," he says, gesturing toward the urn. Even the gods expect a small transaction these days. You take the coin. It's a 5 drachma piece, heavy and cool in your palm. You walk toward the brass machine, leaving the silent wind organ behind. The transition is complete. You are moving from the elemental voices of air and water into the mechanical bureaucracy of the temple. The workshop is getting darker now, as the sun sinks lower. The shadows of the organ's sails dancing on the floor like long spindly legs. You stand before the holy water machine, the coin held over the slot, and you realize that in Hero's Alexandria, even grace has a price. And that price is precisely measured by a lever and a plug. You drop the coin, and the clink of metal on metal echoes through the room, signaling the start of a very different kind of miracle. The coin slips from your fingers and enters the narrow slit at the top of the brass urn with a satisfying, metallic tink. For a split second, there is absolute silence. The kind of silence that makes you wonder if you've just been swindled by an ancient Greek engineer. But then, deep inside the belly of the vessel, you hear a heavy thud, followed by the rhythmic creak of a wooden lever and the soft, urgent splash of liquid hitting a basin. From a small spout at the bottom of the urn, a perfectly measured stream of cool, clear water pours out into your cupped hands. It is exactly enough for a ritual washing. No more, no less. You watch as the flow stops as abruptly as it began, leaving your palms damp and the room smelling faintly of cedar-infused water. You've just participated in a transaction that is nearly 2,000 years old. The world's first successful interaction with a vending machine. A mainstream historical fact that never fails to amuse is that Hero of Alexandria truly is the father of automated retail. Long before anyone thought of putting a bag of chips behind a glass pane, Hero realized that the temples of Alexandria had a bit of a logistics problem. Worshippers were entering the sacred spaces and taking far more than their fair share of holy water, leading to waste and constant refilling by the lower-level priests. To solve this, Hero designed the Heron, the sacred vessel. It was a marvel of simple, brilliant physics. Inside the urn, the coin fell onto a small horizontal plate attached to a lever. The weight of the coin depressed the plate, which lifted a plug at the other end of the lever, allowing the water to flow out through the spout. As the plate tilted further, the coin eventually slid off and fell into a locked collection box at the bottom, allowing the lever to snap back into place and reseal the plug. It was the ultimate pay-to-pray system, ensuring that the gods and the temple treasury got exactly what they were owed. You stand there, staring at the brass urn, realizing that you've just seen the birth of the service economy. It's a bit cynical, isn't it? The idea that even a blessing from the divine could be reduced to a weight-based mechanical trigger. Hero reaches over and unlocks a small door at the base of the machine, revealing a pile of bronze coins that have already been donated today. An obscure and rather quirky bit of trivia is that the design was so effective it remained virtually unchanged for centuries in various parts of the Mediterranean. Some historians even suggest that the vending machine concept was later adapted for everything from dispensing wine in taverns to grain in times of famine, though the holy water version is the only one Hero meticulously documented in his writings. He shakes the box of coins, a sound that in his mind is probably just as musical as the copper birds he built earlier. "It's efficient," he mutters, "and unlike a priest, it doesn't need to take a nap in the afternoon." The workshop is growing dim now, the long shadows of the evening turning the brass vessels into strange, silent silhouettes. You look at the urn and find yourself wondering about the people who used it. Imagine being a first-century citizen, walking into a temple and seeing a machine that responds to your money without a human being in sight. It must have felt like a direct, if somewhat impersonal, line to the gods. However, a point that historians still fiercely debate is the scale on which these machines were actually deployed. While Hero's designs are technically flawless, we have yet to find a single archaeological remains of a holy water vending machine from the Roman era. This leads some scholars to wonder if Hero was more of a concept artist than a manufacturer. Did these urns truly stand in the lobbies of the great temples of Alexandria? Or were they just clever ideas, tucked away in a book to impress the emperor's funding committee? Without a physical specimen, we are left to wonder if Hero's automated grace was a widespread reality or a beautiful forgotten dream. Hero moves toward the urn and resets the lever with a practiced flick of his wrist. He doesn't seem bothered by the lack of archaeological evidence that will haunt people 2,000 years later. He's too busy thinking about the physics of the nothingness inside the pipe. You realize that to him, The money is secondary to the vacuum. He is fascinated by the way the water is held in place by air pressure until the lever disrupts the balance. He begins to explain the concept of horror vacui, the idea that nature abhors a vacuum, which was the prevailing scientific belief of the time. According to this theory, the world would do almost anything to prevent a pocket of truly empty space from forming, and it was this atmospheric panic that Hero harnessed to make his machines work. You watch as he points to the small air hole in the top of the urn, explaining how the water only flows because the air is allowed to rush in and replace it. The silence of the workshop is broken only by the occasional clink as Hero sorts through his coins. You find yourself feeling a little bit sorry for the worshippers who stood before this machine. There is something profoundly lonely about a brass vessel that gives you a blessing in exchange for a coin. It lacks the warmth of a human interaction, the shared prayer, the eye contact. But then you look at Hero's soot-stained face and his brilliant, tired eyes, and you realize that he didn't build it to be cold. He built it to be perfect. In his world, a machine is more reliable than a human being because a machine doesn't have a bad day and it doesn't lie. It simply follows the laws of the universe. You take a deep breath, the air in the workshop feeling heavy and still. The transition from the world of wind and melody to the world of coins and gravity has been a lesson in Roman pragmatism. Alexandria was a city that knew how to monetize its genius. You look at the water basin at the base of the urn, the surface of the liquid perfectly still, reflecting the flickering light of a nearby oil lamp. You realize that you are standing at the edge of a great psychological shift in human history. We are beginning to trust the machine to do the things we used to ask of each other. The sun has finally dropped below the horizon, and the sky outside the high windows has turned a deep, bruised purple. Hero blows out one of the lamps, leaving the holy water machine in shadow. He starts to walk toward the center of the room, toward the large temple doors that have been sitting quietly in the center of the floor. The transition is subtle but profound. You are moving away from the small gadgets of the laboratory and toward the grand stage of the temple itself. The pay-to-play machine was just a warm-up. Hero is about to show you how he mastered the invisible forces of the world, heat, steam, and pressure, to create a spectacle that would make even the most cynical skeptic fall to their knees. You cup your damp hands together, the last of the holy water evaporating in the dry air, and prepare yourself for the fire that is about to be lit beneath the altar. You stand there in the deepening twilight of the workshop, your hands still slightly damp from the holy water machine. The moisture is evaporating rapidly in the dry Alexandrian air, leaving behind a faint, tingly coolness. Hero isn't looking at the coins he just collected. He is staring intently at the empty space inside the glass neck of a small flask. To anyone else, that flask is half empty, but to Hero, it is packed with a restless, invisible crowd of particles. He picks up a small bronze sphere, perfectly hollow and polished, with a single narrow tube extending from its side. He hands it to you. It's light, almost weightless, and as you hold it, you realize that tonight's lesson isn't about what we can see, but about the staggering power of what we cannot. Hero gestures for you to place the tube in a bowl of water, and then, quite unceremoniously, tells you to suck the air out of the sphere through a secondary valve. You do as you're told, feeling the slight resistance of the air against your lungs. As you draw the nothingness out, you watch in genuine surprise as the water from the bowl suddenly rushes up the tube and into the sphere, defying gravity with a greedy slurping sound. You've just performed a basic vacuum experiment, and while it feels like magic, Hero is already scribbling notes about pneuma. A mainstream historical fact is that Hero's treatise, the Pneumatica, was the most advanced study of atmospheric pressure and vacuums in the ancient world. He was obsessed with the idea that air wasn't just empty space, but a physical body made of tiny elastic particles that could be compressed, stretched, and harnessed like a coiled spring. You hand the sphere back, and Hero taps the bronze surface. He explains that the world is terrified of being empty. An obscure and rather quirky bit of trivia is that this very principle led to one of the most common medical tools in the Roman Empire, the ventosa, or the bronze cupping glass. Doctors and barbers would heat the air inside a small bronze cup and then slap it onto a patient's skin. As the air cooled and contracted, it created a vacuum that sucked the flesh upward, supposedly drawing out bad humors or toxins. You imagine a Roman citizen sitting in a barber's chair, having his back covered in these suction cups, and you realize that Hero's invisible force was literally pulling at the skin of every person in the city. It's a strange, slightly uncomfortable thought, that the same force that opened temple doors was also used to treat a bad case of the flu. The workshop is now illuminated only by the flickering orange glow of a single charcoal brazier. Hero moves to a large diagram scratched into a wax tablet. He is explaining the elasticity of air, the way it can be squeezed into a small space until it's screaming to get out. However, a point that historians still fiercely debate is Hero's actual philosophical stance on the void. Did he truly believe in the existence of an absolute vacuum, an idea championed by the radical atomists like Epicurus? Or did he believe, as the more traditional Stoics did, that the universe was a plenum where no true empty space could exist? Some scholars argue that Hero was a closet atomist, hiding his controversial beliefs in the language of mechanics, while others believe he only cared about small vacuums trapped between particles, avoiding the bigger existential questions entirely. You watch him move a small piston inside a glass tube. The air inside hisses as it's compressed, a tiny angry sound in the quiet room. You realize that to Hero, the air is a sleeping giant. He isn't interested in the god's whims. He's interested in the tension of the atmosphere. He shows you a design for a fire engine, a double-action pump that could throw a continuous stream of water onto a burning building using compressed air. It's a brilliant, life-saving invention that would have been a godsend in the fire-prone wooden tenements of Rome. Yet, in another classic, Alexandrian twist, these pumps were often kept in the basements of wealthy villas just to power decorative fountains rather than fighting fires. It's a recurring theme in your journey tonight. The ancient world had the brain of a scientist, but the heart of a showman. Hero's eyes are glowing in the firelight as he talks about the pneuma as the breath of the world. He isn't just an engineer. He's a man trying to talk to the invisible. He picks up a small leather bellows and pumps it gently toward the brazier, the coals flaring into a brilliant, blinding white. If you squeeze the air, it gives you fire, he mutters. If you heat the air, it gives you motion. You realize that he is describing the fundamental cycle of the steam engine, 17 centuries before the Industrial Revolution, actually decided to show up. He has all the ingredients: the pressure, the heat, the mechanics. But in a world fueled by the labor of millions of people, a machine that breathes is just a curiosity, a clever trick to pass the time during a dinner party. You find yourself sitting on a stool, the shadows of the workshop dancing on the walls, like silent clockwork ghosts. The transition from the world of holy water and coins to this abstract, invisible pressure has left your mind feeling a little lightheaded. You look at the bronze sphere on the table, and you no longer see it as a toy. You see it as a vessel of potential energy. Hero is no longer just a tinkerer. He is a man who has learned to weigh the wind. He begins to pack away his glass flasks, his movements slow and methodical. The noise of the city outside has died down to a low, rhythmic hum, the sound of a million people breathing, the very pneuma that Hero is trying to trap in a jar. The air in the workshop is getting cooler now, the heat of the forge finally dissipating. Hero walks over to the heavy temple doors that stand in the center of the room. He checks the hidden pipes beneath the floor, his fingers tracing the cold bronze joints with a tenderness that borders on the obsessive. He is preparing for the grand finale. The transition is smooth and inevitable. We are moving from the understanding of the force to the application of the miracle. You realize that the invisible force of the air is about to be put to work. Hero gestures for you to stand back. He is about to light the altar fire. The transition is complete. You are moving from the laboratory into the sanctuary. You realize that everything you've seen tonight, the singing birds, the wind organ, the coin-operated urn, and the vacuum sphere, has been leading to this. Hero is about to use the nothingness to move a mountain of wood and brass. You take a deep breath, feeling the air fill your lungs, and you wonder if Hero is right. If the very atmosphere around you is just a coiled spring waiting for a spark. The doors are closed, the altar is ready, and in the silence of the first-century night, the invisible is about to become very, very loud. You leave the smoke and clutter of Hero's workshop behind, stepping out into the cool, indigo embrace of an Alexandrian evening. The transition is jarring. One moment you are surrounded by the smell of scorched brass and the frantic energy of a man talking to a boiling pot, and the next, you are walking toward a sanctuary of absolute imposing stillness. You are heading toward one of the city's great temples, perhaps the Serapeum or a grand shrine to Isis, where the architecture isn't just designed to house a god, but to humble a human. You find yourself standing in a massive courtyard paved with white marble that seems to glow in the moonlight. Ahead of you, rising like a cliff face of gold and cedar, are the great temple doors. They are easily 5 meters high, clad in polished bronze plates that reflect the flickering light of the torches held by the silent temple attendants, the Neokoroi. You take your place among a small crowd of worshippers who have gathered for the evening ritual. There is a palpable tension in the air, a mixture of religious fervor and the kind of hushed excitement you'd find at a high-stakes theater performance. A mainstream historical fact about ancient religion is that it was, first and foremost, a public spectacle. It wasn't about private, quiet prayer in a pew. It was a sensory assault designed to make you feel the presence of the divine through scale, sound, and scent. You can smell the heavy, cloying perfume of frankincense burning in tall bronze braziers, and the air feels thick with the collective breath of 100 people waiting for a miracle. You adjust your tunic, feeling a little bit like an imposter among the devout, but you find yourself caught up in the rhythm of the chanting, a low melodic drone that seems to vibrate through the soles of your feet. As you stand before the doors, you notice a small, inconspicuous altar sitting on a stone pedestal in front of them. It's an ordinary-looking charcoal brazier, its iron legs carved to look like lion's paws. To the person standing next to you, this is just a place to offer a pinch of incense. But because you've just come from Hero's workshop, you notice the tiny hair-thin seams in the marble base beneath the altar. You know that beneath this floor lies a labyrinth of lead pipes and hidden reservoirs. An obscure and rather bizarre bit of trivia is that ancient temples were often built with hollow walls or acoustic chambers designed specifically to make the statues appear to speak or the air to hum with a divine frequency. Some priests were even rumored to use hidden speaking tubes, essentially an ancient intercom system, to whisper prophecies into the ears of startled worshippers. It was a world where theology and stagecraft were indistinguishable. And standing here now, looking at those massive silent doors, you realize how effective that deception truly was. The chanting stops abruptly. The silence that follows is so heavy, it feels like a weight on your chest. You watch as a high priest, draped in white linen and wearing a heavy gold pectoral, steps forward. He carries a small silver bowl of incense. With a slow, deliberate grace, he approaches the altar and scatters the grains over the glowing coals. A thin plume of white smoke rises into the air, spiraling toward the stars. For a long, agonizing minute, nothing happens. The crowd holds its breath. You find yourself staring at the gap between the doors, waiting for a handle to turn or a priest to push from the other side. You know that somewhere beneath the priest's feet, the nothingness is beginning to move, triggered by the heat of the fire. However, a point that historians still fiercely debate is the degree of knowing among the ancient audience. Did the average Alexandrian citizen truly believe that the gods were physically pushing the doors open? Or were they in on the joke, appreciating the mechanical miracle as a form of sacred art? Some scholars argue that the ancient world didn't draw a hard line between natural and supernatural the way we do. If a man built a machine that moved by fire, it was simply because the gods had given him the wisdom to harness the fire. Others suggest that the mystery was the point, that the mechanical secrets were guarded by the priesthood like state secrets, and to reveal the hidden pipes would have been an act of ultimate sacrilege. Standing here in the moonlight, watching the smoke curl around the priest's head, you realize that the answer doesn't really matter. The awe is real, whether it's caused by a god or a gear. You see a slight shimmer in the air above the altar, a distortion caused by the rising heat. Suddenly, there is a low, thundering sound, like a deep groan from the earth itself. It isn't the sound of a person pushing a door. It's the sound of stone and metal, responding to a force far greater than a human muscle. Slowly, with a majestic, unstoppable momentum, the great doors begin to swing inward. There is no one visible behind them. No ropes, no pulleys, no straining slaves. They simply glide open, revealing the cavernous, lamp-lit interior of the temple, where the statue of the god sits in a cloud of golden haze. The crowd gasps and falls to their knees, their foreheads touching the cold marble of the courtyard. You stay standing for a second too long, transfixed by the sheer elegance of the motion, before realizing you should probably look a bit more humble. You feel a strange sense of vertigo. You know exactly how it works. The fire heats the air. The air pushes the water from one hidden vessel to another, and the weight of the water pulls the ropes that turn the door spindles. You've seen the source code in Hero's workshop, yet seeing it executed on this scale is still breathtaking. It's the difference between reading a musical score and hearing a full orchestra. The transition from the small, gritty experiments of the laboratory to the grand, divine theater of the temple is a lesson in the power of presentation. Hero wasn't just building machines. He was building a reality where the impossible was a daily occurrence. The doors stand wide open now, the light from 1,000 oil lamps spilling out into the courtyard like a river of gold. You look at the high priest, who is standing perfectly still, his arms raised toward the statue. He looks like a man who has just commanded the universe to obey him. You find yourself wondering if he even knows how the machine works, or if he too is waiting for the fire to do its job, trusting in the nothingness as much as he trusts in the gods. The line between the engineer and the mystic has blurred into a single, shimmering image. As the worshippers begin to crawl toward the sanctuary, the chanting resumes, louder and more triumphant than before. You turn and look back toward the harbor, where the Pharos lighthouse is still blinking its rhythmic warning to the ships at sea. You realize that Alexandria is a city of two lights, the practical light of the beacon and the miraculous light of the temple fire. Both are products of the same human genius, yet they occupy completely different worlds. You adjust your tunic and begin to walk away, slipping through the shadows of the colonnade as the miracle continues behind you. The transition is quiet and reflective. You are moving away from the crowd and back toward the lonely moonlit streets. You realize that tonight's journey has brought you to the heart of the ancient contradiction. We use our greatest inventions to prove the things we cannot see. You feel a soft breeze on your face, the same wind that powered Hero's organ, and you wonder if the nothingness is still watching. The fire on the altar is starting to die down now, and you know that as it cools, the doors will eventually, silently, creak shut again, resetting the miracle for the next morning. You take one last look at the golden glow of the sanctuary before turning the corner, leaving the gods to their mechanical solitude. The great bronze doors stand wide open, the golden haze of the sanctuary spilling out across the courtyard. But you aren't following the crowd of worshippers as they crawl toward the statue of the god. Instead, your mind is racing back to the gritty floor of Hero's workshop. You keep looking at that small lion-pawed altar, the one that started this whole miracle. To everyone else, it's a sacred pedestal where prayers are transformed into smoke. To you, now that you've seen the source code, it looks suspiciously like the ancient version of a pilot light on a water heater. You realize that the real mystery of the temple isn't what's happening in the sanctuary. It's what's happening about 6 feet beneath the paving stones. The transition from being a mesmerized worshiper to a skeptical observer is complete. And as the crowd moves forward, you find yourself lingering by the altar, imagining the mechanical heart beaten in the dark below. A mainstream historical fact that grounds this entire spectacle is that Hero's temple door mechanism is the world's first documented use of an automated weight displacement system powered by atmospheric pressure. This wasn't a fluke. It was a carefully calculated piece of thermodynamics. When the priest lit that fire, he wasn't just performing a ritual. He was activating a boiler. Inside the hollow altar was a hidden chamber filled with air. As the charcoal fire heated the marble and the metal, the air inside the chamber began to expand, the pneuma getting restless again, just as Hero described. This expanding air traveled down a concealed pipe into a large, airtight sphere, buried beneath the courtyard, which was half filled with water. The pressure of the expanding air forced the water out of the sphere and through a siphon into a large bucket suspended by a system of ropes and pulleys. As the bucket got heavier, it dropped, pulling the ropes that were wound around the vertical spindles of the temple doors. Fire becomes heat. Heat becomes pressure. Pressure becomes weight, and weight becomes motion. It's a chain reaction that would make a modern engineer nod in approval, provided they could ignore the lack of a digital control panel. You lean a little closer to the altar, and if you listen carefully, beneath the sound of the chanting, you can hear a faint, distant gurgle hiss coming from the cracks in the stone. It's the sound of the gods plumbing. An obscure and rather bizarre bit of trivia is that some of these temple mechanisms were rumored to use mercury instead of water. Because mercury is much denser than water, you would need a far smaller volume of liquid to create the same pulling force, allowing the engineers to hide the entire machine in even tighter spaces, like the hollowed-out columns of a shrine. Imagine an ancient temple basement filled with vats of liquid silver, shifting silently in the dark to open doors or tilt statues. It's a bit of a toxic nightmare by modern standards, but in the 1st century, it was just the pinnacle of high-density energy storage. You watch a stray spark jump from the altar and vanish into the air, and you realize that the priest is effectively a stage manager, and the altar is his control deck. However, a point that historians still fiercely debate is whether these mechanisms were intended to be a deliberate fraud used by the priesthood to trick the masses, or if they were seen as a legitimate way to manifest the divine will through human ingenuity. Some scholars believe that the priests of Alexandria were essentially the ancient world's most successful con artists, using Hero's gadgets to maintain their grip on a superstitious population by faking miracles on demand. Others, more charitably, argue that the technology was seen as a gift from the gods themselves. In this view, the machine wasn't faking a miracle. It was a sacred instrument, much like a pipe organ in a cathedral. The truth of the opening doors wasn't in the pipes, but in the experience of the worshipper. Standing here now, feeling the heat still radiating from the altar, you realize that, for most people, the how didn't matter. They didn't want a physics lesson. They wanted to feel small in the presence of something great. The fire is beginning to burn low now, the charcoal turning into a fine, powdery gray ash. You know that as the air inside the altar cools, it will begin to contract, creating a vacuum that will eventually suck the water back from the bucket and into the reservoir. The bucket will lighten, the counterweights will take over, and those massive doors will silently, spookily close themselves. It's a self-resetting loop of sacred theater. You find yourself wondering if the priests ever had technical difficulties. Did the doors ever get stuck halfway? Did a pipe ever burst, sending a geyser of sacred water through the temple floor during a high-stakes ceremony? You can almost imagine an ancient maintenance man, some apprentice of Hero, crawling through a narrow tunnel with a bronze wrench, frantically trying to fix a leak before the governor of Egypt arrives for the noon sacrifice. The transition from the golden light of the temple back to the cool shadows of the colonnade is a bit of a relief. The intensity of the miracle is exhausting. You find yourself looking at the other worshippers with a new sense of perspective. They see the hand of Isis. You see the expansion of air. It's a lonely kind of knowledge, isn't it? To see the gears behind the curtain. But as you walk away, you realize that Hero's fire wasn't just opening doors. It was opening a new way of thinking. He was proving that the world operated according to laws that could be measured, predicted, and put to work. He was turning the terrifying whims of the gods into a series of repeatable mechanical steps. You find a quiet spot on a marble step, far enough from the crowd that the chanting is just a melodic murmur. The moon is high now, reflecting off the white limestone of the city, making everything look like it's made of frozen silver. You think about the secret fire and the way it moved those tons of bronze and wood. It's a primitive version of the internal combustion engine, minus the wheels and the gasoline. You realize that Alexandria was a city that had the future in its hands, but was using it to decorate the past. The fire beneath the altar was a spark that could have fueled a revolution, but instead, it was used to keep the old stories alive. As you sit there, you notice a small wooden cart being pushed toward a side entrance of the temple by a group of men in dark tunics. It's covered in a heavy cloth, but as it hits a bump in the paving stones, you hear the distinctive clack, clack, clink of wooden pulleys and lead weights. This isn't a cart of offerings. It's a cart of parts. You realize that the show never truly ends. The transition from the divine performance back to the gritty reality of maintenance is constant. The fire needs to be cleaned, the reservoirs need to be checked, and the ropes need to be greased with animal fat to keep the miracle silent. The night air is still, but you can feel the warmth of the city all around you. A million fires burning in a million hearths. You realize that Alexandria is a city powered by heat. From the lighthouse beacon to the temple altar to the blacksmith's forge, fire is the engine of this civilization. Hero simply found a way to make it move. You adjust your tunic and stand up, your legs feeling heavy, but your mind alert. The fire beneath the altar has shown you the power of the invisible, and as you head back toward the center of the city, you are ready for the next wonder. You've seen the doors open. Now you want to see the gods themselves start to move. You are heading toward the automatic theater, the world's first robot play, where the puppets don't need a master, and the story tells itself. You leave the glowing threshold of the temple and wander back into the heart of the city, the cool night air, feeling like a fresh cloth against your face. The transition from the massive divine scale of the temple doors to the human-scaled buzz of a public square is a welcome shift. You find yourself in a small, semicircular plaza near the gymnasium, where a crowd has gathered around a strange wooden structure sitting on a low stone platform. It looks like a miniature temple, perhaps 3 feet tall, carved from dark cedar and decorated with vibrant blue and red pigments. It has wheels at the base and a small door at the front that is currently closed. To a modern eye, it might look like a very elaborate dollhouse. But to the people of Alexandria, this is the main event. You are about to witness Hero's automatic theater. And for the next 10 minutes, you are going to see a tragedy unfold with absolutely no human actors on stage. A mainstream historical fact that secures Hero's place in the history of technology is that his automata is widely considered to be the world's first programmable robot. This wasn't just a toy that did one thing. It was a device that could be programmed to perform a series of complex actions in a specific order. By winding a single rope around a central axle in different directions and creating loops or hitches at specific intervals, Hero could control when a puppet moved, when a scene changed, and even when a miniature fire was lit on stage. It was a digital sequence written in hemp and wood rather than binary code. You take your place on the edge of the fountain, watching as a young apprentice, one of Hero's students no doubt, steps up to the machine and pulls a small wooden pin from the side. Suddenly, the machine begins to hum. It's a soft, rhythmic whir click that sounds like a very large clock trying to clear its throat. With a smooth, elegant motion, the little temple begins to roll across the platform all by itself. It moves in a perfect circle, stops, turns 45 degrees, and then rolls back to its original position. The crowd ripples with a mixture of delight and a tiny bit of, "Is this haunted?" anxiety. Then, the front doors of the miniature stage snap open. Inside, a group of tiny wooden figures, characters from the myth of Nauplius, begin to move. They aren't just wobbling, they are performing. Miniature smiths are hammering at an anvil, their arms rising and falling in perfect time. Tiny sailors are pulling at ropes on a ship. A mainstream historical detail often forgotten is that this play actually had multiple acts. The machine would stop, the scenery would rotate or slide away to reveal a new backdrop, and the puppets would begin a completely different set of movements. It was the birth of the animated feature film, 17 centuries before the invention of celluloid. You lean forward trying to understand how such a small box can hold so much choreography. Hero's secret wasn't steam this time. It was gravity. An obscure and rather fascinating bit of trivia involves the drive of the machine. Hidden inside the central pillar of the theater was a heavy lead weight, resting on top of a cylinder filled with dry sand or fine mustard seeds. There was a small hole at the bottom of the cylinder, and as the sand slowly leaked out, the lead weight would descend at a perfectly constant speed. This falling weight pulled the master rope, which was tangled in an incredibly complex web of secondary strings and pulleys that moved the puppets. By changing the speed at which the sand leaked out, Hero could essentially edit the pace of the play. It's a bit humbling to realize that the first frame rate in history was determined by how fast a mustard seed could fall through a hole. The play reaches its climax, a dramatic scene where the goddess Athena destroys a shipwrecked crew with a bolt of lightning. A tiny bronze lightning bolt actually streaks across the miniature stage, followed by a puff of lycopodium powder that creates a small, safe explosion of light and smoke. The crowd cheers, mesmerized by these special effects. However, a point that historians still fiercely debate is the actual reliability of these machines in a dusty outdoor environment like Alexandria. While Hero's diagrams are flawless, some scholars argue that the gut strings used for the pulleys would have been incredibly sensitive to humidity and temperature. A particularly humid night by the harbor might cause the strings to stretch, making Athena's lightning bolt fire 10 seconds late or causing the smiths to hammer thin air. Others point to the precision of Alexandrian craftsmanship as evidence that these robots were the Swiss watches of antiquity, capable of thousands of flawless performances. Standing here, watching the little sailors move with the grace of living men, you find it hard to be a skeptic. The play ends with the little doors snapping shut, and the machine rolls back to its starting point with a final, satisfied thud of the lead weight hitting the bottom of its chamber. The apprentice steps forward and begins to rewind the rope, a process that looks like it takes about 5 times longer than the play itself. You find yourself thinking about the programming. In our world, we type on a keyboard. In Hero's world, you spent 3 hours carefully wrapping a hemp cord around a notched wooden cylinder. It was an art form of patience. You realize that the automata represents a bridge between the physical and the virtual. The story exists in the arrangement of the rope, waiting to be read by the gravity of the falling weight. The crowd begins to disperse, heading off to the nearby taverns to argue about whether the lightning bolt was real or a trick of the light. You stay by the fountain for a moment, the sound of the splashing water masking the retreating footsteps. The transition from the world of puppets back to the world of people feels strange. You look at your own hands, your own muscles, and you feel a bit clumsy. Hero has created something that moves with a mechanical perfection that humans can't quite match. It's a little bit spooky, isn't it? The idea that we can build a box that can tell our stories for us, long after we've walked away. The moon is now reflecting in the basin of the fountain, the surface broken only by the occasional ripple. You look back at the wooden theater, now being loaded onto a larger cart by the apprentices. It looks so small and ordinary in the dark, just a box of cedar and paint. You realize that the miracle isn't in the box. It's in the mind of the man who saw a pile of sand and a lead weight and thought, I can make a goddess move with that. The transition is quiet and a bit melancholic. You are moving away from the joy of the performance and into the deeper questions of the night. As you turn to leave the square, you see a faint glow coming from a window in a nearby stone building. It's a scriptorium, where a few tired scribes are still hunched over their desks. You think about the scrolls you saw in the library and the steam ball Hero was talking to earlier. You realize that Alexandria is a city where ideas are constantly being born, but they don't always grow up. You are heading toward the harbor now, walking past the silent docks, and you find yourself wondering why this amazing technology, the steam, the robots, the programming, never left the toy stage. You are moving toward the mystery of the missing engine, the question that will haunt historians for the next 2 millennia. The gears have stopped turning for the night, but the air is still thick with the what-ifs of a world that almost changed. You leave the quiet square, where the automatic theater has just finished its silent performance, and walk toward the great harbor. Your sandals clicking rhythmically on the cool, damp limestone. The transition from the bright, engineered miracles of the city center to the dark, working-class edge of the Mediterranean is a somber one. The moon is now a pale silver disk hanging over the Pharos, and the water of the harbor is as smooth and black as polished obsidian. You find yourself walking past rows of silent grain ships, their hulls groaning softly as they tug at their mooring ropes. Here, in the shadows of the massive stone cranes and the warehouses of the Annona, you can see the true engines of the Roman world. Hundreds of men, mostly slaves or desperately poor laborers, sleeping in the doorways or on the decks of the ships. They are the power source of this civilization, and as you think about the spinning brass sphere in Hero's workshop, the air in the harbor feels heavy, with a question that won't be answered for 17 centuries. A mainstream historical fact that sits at the center of this mystery is that Hero's Aeolipile, the ball of Aeolus, was a functioning steam turbine. It consisted of a hollow sphere mounted on a boiler, with two L-shaped nozzles sticking out of its sides. When the water boiled and the steam hissed out of the nozzles, the sphere spun at high speed due to the reaction force. It was, for all intents and purposes, the world's first steam engine. Hero had successfully converted thermal energy into kinetic motion. He had harnessed the nothingness and made it spin. But as you look at the massive hand-cranked cranes on the docks, you realize that this invention never left the laboratory. It remained a philosophical toy, a curiosity to be discussed over wine in the Mausion, while the heavy lifting of the empire continued to be done by human muscle, leather straps, and wooden levers. You sit on a stone bollard, watching the gentle lap of the tide against the quay. An obscure and rather startling bit of trivia is that the Romans weren't actually allergic to labor-saving technology. They just didn't seem to care about it the way we do. For example, in the Roman province of Gaul, they actually invented a donkey-pushed combine harvester called the Valus, which could strip grain from a field far faster than a group of men with sickles. Yet, even though it worked, it was almost entirely ignored by the rest of the empire. Historians have found that the Valus only appeared in areas where labor was scarce. In the rest of Rome, where there were millions of slaves and poor citizens desperate for work, the efficient machine was seen as a solution to a problem that didn't exist. Why buy a complex, expensive machine that needs maintenance when you can hire 20 men for the price of a few bowls of pottage? This brings us to the great what-if of ancient history. A point that historians still fiercely debate is the blocked industrialization thesis. Why didn't Alexandria kickstart the Industrial Revolution in the 1st century? Some scholars argue it was purely an economic issue. The Roman economy was built on the backs of an infinite supply of cheap human labor, making the high cost of developing steam power unnecessary. Others suggest it was a technical limitation. The Romans lacked the high-quality, high-carbon steel needed to build boilers that wouldn't explode under high pressure. You can almost imagine Hero trying to build a giant Aeolipile, only for the bronze seams to burst and spray boiling water across the room, a safety hazard that would have discouraged even the boldest investor. However, another group of historians argues that the real barrier was cultural. The Greeks and Romans saw mechanics as a lower art, something for craftsmen and showmen, while true science was the pursuit of abstract mathematical beauty. To use a steam ball to pump water was seen as a bit, well, tacky.
You look out at the Pharos. Its light, blinking with a steady, mechanical heart. You realize that you are standing in a world that is technologically stagnant. By choice, not by lack of genius. Alexandria had the brains, the resources, and the math. But it lacked the spark of necessity. In our world, we value productivity above almost anything else. In Hero's world, they valued monumentality and prestige. A machine that opens temple doors is prestigious because it proves the power of the gods. A machine that hauls grain is just a boring box that takes jobs away from the dock workers. You feel a strange sense of irony. We spend our lives trying to save time. The Romans had so much time, or at least so much human life, that they didn't know what to do with it. The transition from the world of Hero's workshop to the reality of the harbor is a lesson in the fragility of progress. You look at the silhouettes of the sailors, their bodies lean and scarred from years of manual labor, and you wonder if they would have even wanted a steam engine. In their world, strength is a point of pride, and work is the only thing that keeps the belly full. If Hero had replaced them with a clanking metal beast, they wouldn't have gone to school or started a tech company. They would have starved. The missing engine isn't a failure of imagination. It's a reflection of a society that had found a different kind of balance. It's a balance built on inequality. Yes, but it's one that lasted for 1,000 years. You find yourself standing up, the cold salt air finally beginning to seep through your tunic. You walk along the water's edge, your footsteps muffled by the sand that has blown in from the desert. The transition is quiet and heavy. You are moving away from the excitement of the future and back into the weight of the past. You look back at the city, the white marble buildings glowing like ghostly teeth in the moonlight, and you realize how easily knowledge can be lost. Hero's books are sitting in the library right now, safe and dry. But if the library burns, and you know it will, those diagrams of steam balls and automatic theaters will become nothing more than rumors. The nothingness won't just be inside the pipes. It will be in the history books where the engine should have been. And even Alexandria is starting to slow down. The shouting of the harbor guards is distant now, and the only sound is the rhythmic slap of the water against the stone. You realize that tonight's journey into the mechanical heart of the past is nearing its end. You've seen the fire, the steam, the wind, and the water. You've seen the genius of a man who was born 1,800 years too early. As you head toward the final district of your walk, the Brushan, you find yourself walking with a new sense of reverence for the things we have forgotten. The transition is a slow, lingering one. You move away from the docks and back toward the silent halls of the scholars. You think about the papyrus scrolls, the fragile, flammable memory of the human race. You realize that for all Hero's gears and brass, his greatest challenge wasn't the vacuum. It was the passage of time. You are heading toward the scriptorium now, to see how easily a world can be erased. And as the moonlight fades behind a cloud, the city of Alexandria feels less like a superpower and more like a dream that is just about to end. You leave the quiet square where the automatic theater has just finished its silent performance and walk toward the great harbor, your sandals clicking rhythmically on the cool, damp limestone. The transition from the bright, engineered miracles of the city center to the dark, working-class edge of the Mediterranean is a somber one. The moon is now a pale, silver disk hanging over the Pharos, and the water of the harbor is as smooth and black as polished obsidian. You find yourself walking past rows of silent grain ships, their hulls groaning softly as they tug at their mooring ropes. Here, in the shadows of the massive stone cranes and the warehouses of the Inanna, you can see the true engines of the Roman world. Hundreds of men, mostly slaves or desperately poor laborers, sleeping in the doorways or on the decks of the ships. They are the power source of this civilization. And as you think about the spinning brass sphere in Hero's workshop, the air in the harbor feels heavy with a question that won't be answered for 17 centuries. A mainstream historical fact that sits at the center of this mystery is that Aeolipile, the ball of Aeolus, was a functioning steam turbine. It consisted of a hollow sphere mounted on a boiler with two L-shaped nozzles sticking out of its sides. When the water boiled and the steam hissed out of the nozzles, the sphere spun at high speed due to the reaction force. It was, for all intents and purposes, the world's first steam engine. Hero had successfully converted thermal energy into kinetic motion. He had harnessed the nothingness and made it spin. But as you look at the massive hand-cranked cranes on the docks, you realize that this invention never left the laboratory. It remained a philosophical toy, a curiosity to be discussed over wine in the Mauschen, while the heavy lifting of the empire continued to be done by human muscle, leather straps, and wooden levers. You sit on a stone bollard, watching the gentle lap of the tide against the quay. An obscure and rather startling bit of trivia is that the Romans weren't actually allergic to labor. Saving technology, they just didn't seem to care about it the way we do. For example, in the Roman province of Gaul, they actually invented a donkey-pushed combine harvester called the vallus, which could strip grain from a field far faster than a group of men with sickles. Yet, even though it worked, it was almost entirely ignored by the rest of the empire. Historians have found that the vallus only appeared in areas where labor was scarce. In the rest of Rome, where there were millions of slaves and poor citizens desperate for work, the efficient machine was seen as a solution to a problem that didn't exist. Why buy a complex, expensive machine that needs maintenance when you can hire 20 men for the price of a few bowls of pottage? This brings us to the great what if of ancient history. A point that historians still fiercely debate is the blocked industrialization thesis. Why didn't Alexandria kickstart the Industrial Revolution in the 1st century? Some scholars argue it was purely an economic issue. The Roman economy was built on the backs of an infinite supply of cheap human labor, making the high cost of developing steam power unnecessary. Others suggest it was a technical limitation. The Romans lacked the high-quality, carbon steel needed to build boilers that wouldn't explode under high pressure. You can almost imagine Hero trying to build a giant Aeolipile, only for the bronze seams to burst and spray boiling water across the room. A safety hazard that would have discouraged even the boldest investor. However, another group of historians argues that the real barrier was cultural. The Greeks and Romans saw mechanics as a lower art, something for craftsmen and showmen, while true science was the pursuit of abstract, mathematical beauty. To use a steam ball to pump water was seen as a bit, well, tacky. You look out at the Pharos, its light blinking with a steady, mechanical heart. You realize that you are standing in a world that is technologically stagnant. By choice, not by lack of genius. Alexandria had the brains, the resources, and the math, but it lacked the spark of necessity. In our world, we value productivity above almost anything else. In Hero's world, they valued monumentality and prestige. A machine that opens temple doors is prestigious because it proves the power of the gods. A machine that hauls grain is just a boring box that takes jobs away from the dock workers. You feel a strange sense of irony. We spend our lives trying to save time. The Romans had so much time, or at least so much human life, that they didn't know what to do with it. The transition from the world of Hero's workshop to the reality of the harbor is a lesson in the fragility of progress. You look at the silhouettes of the sailors, their bodies lean and scarred from years of manual labor, and you wonder if they would have even wanted a steam engine. In their world, strength is a point of pride, and work is the only thing that keeps the belly full. If Hero had replaced them with a clanking metal beast, they wouldn't have gone to school or started a tech company. They would have starved. The missing engine isn't a failure of imagination. It's a reflection of a society that had found a different kind of balance. It's a balance built on inequality. Yes, but it's one that lasted for 1,000 years. You find yourself standing up, the cold salt air finally beginning to seep through your tunic. You walk along the water's edge, your footsteps muffled by the sand that has blown in from the desert. The transition is quiet and heavy. You are moving away from the excitement of the future and back into the weight of the past. You look back at the city, the white marble buildings glowing like ghostly teeth in the moonlight, and you realize how easily knowledge can be lost. Hero's books are sitting in the library right now, safe and dry. But if the library burns, and you know it will, those diagrams of steam balls and automatic theaters will become nothing more than rumors. The nothingness won. Just be inside the pipes. It will be in the history books where the engine should have been. The night is deepening, and even Alexandria is starting to slow down. The shouting of the harbor guards is distant now, and the only sound is the rhythmic slap-slap of the water against the stone. You realize that tonight's journey into the mechanical heart of the past is nearing its end. You've seen the fire, the steam, the wind, and the water. You've seen the genius of a man who was born 1800 years too early. As you head toward the final district of your walk, the Brauschen, you find yourself walking with a new sense of reverence for the things we have forgotten. The transition is a slow, lingering one. You move away from the docks and back toward the silent halls of the scholars. You think about the papyrus scrolls, the fragile, flammable memory of the human race. You realize that for all Hero's gears and brass, his greatest challenge wasn't the vacuum. It was the passage of time. You are heading toward the scriptorium now, to see how easily a world can be erased. And as the moonlight fades behind a cloud, the city of Alexandria feels less like a superpower and more like a dream that is just about to end. You step away from the scriptorium, the heavy, pungent scent of cedar oil and iron gall ink still clinging to your clothes like a dusty perfume. The transition from the frantic, silent labor of the scribes to the cool, moonlit tranquility of the Brauschen is a gentle one. The city of Alexandria is finally settling into its deepest sleep. The white marble buildings, so blindingly bright during the day, have turned into soft, ghostly silhouettes under a sky that is vast, dark, and crowded with more stars than you've ever seen. You find yourself walking back through the gardens of the Brauschen, the place where tonight's journey into the mind of Hero first began. The scholars have long since retired to their quarters, their arguments over geometry and vacuums replaced by the rhythmic, collective breathing of a city that has dreamed for 1,000 years. A mainstream historical fact that settles over you like a heavy cloak is that the Brauschen was not just a library or a laboratory. It was a sanctuary of the Pax Romana, a rare pocket of history where the state actually prioritized the pursuit of pure knowledge over immediate military gain. For centuries, this grid-like city served as the intellectual capital of the Mediterranean, a place where a man could be paid to stare at the moon or build a steam ball, just because it was interesting. You walk past a silent fountain, its water barely a trickle now, and realize that you have walked through a prototype of every university and research center that would ever exist. Alexandria wasn't just a place. It was an experiment in what happens when the human brain is given enough shade, enough papyrus, and enough time to wonder why. You turn onto a quiet side street and notice a heavy stone grate in the center of the paving. If you listen closely, you can hear the faint, echoing sound of dripping water far below. An obscure and rather marvelous bit of trivia is that Alexandria was a city built on top of a city, because the Nile water was often muddy. The Romans and Ptolemies constructed a massive network of underground cisterns, hundreds of them, hidden beneath the limestone foundations. Some of these cisterns were grander than palaces, with vaulted ceilings and hundreds of fluted columns, designed to store enough fresh water to keep the city alive through a year-long siege. You are standing on a marble lid over a giant, hidden lake, a feat of civil engineering that was arguably more impressive than the steam-powered toys in Hero's workshop. Yet it remains almost completely forgotten by the casual tourist. You reach the edge of the royal quarter and look back toward the Serapeum, its distant columns catching the silver light. A point that historians still fiercely debate is the true cause of the city's intellectual decline. Was it a sudden, violent break, the torch of a religious mob, or the arrival of a conquering army? Or was it something far more subtle? Some scholars argue that Alexandria simply ran out of newness. They suggest that the scholars stopped experimenting and started merely commenting on the works of the past, turning the Temple of the Muses into a museum in the saddest sense of the word. In this view, Hero was the last of the true inventors, a final spark before the long, slow cooling of the ancient mind. Standing here in the silence, you realize that a city doesn't always die with a bang. Sometimes it just stops asking new questions. You find yourself back at the harbor's edge, where the great Heptastadian causeway joins the land. The lighthouse is still there, its light a steady, rhythmic pulse in the dark. It is the only thing in the city that doesn't sleep. You think about Hero, probably asleep on a cot in his workshop, his soot-stained hands finally still. His Aeolipile is sitting on a table, the bronze cold, the water inside gone flat. The copper birds are silent in their grove. The wind organ has no breeze to play its pipes. The miracles have ended for the day. But as you look at the stars, you realize that the laws of physics they demonstrated haven't gone anywhere. The nothingness is still there, the pressure is still there, and the heat is still waiting for a spark. Alexandria feels different now. It is no longer a bustling superpower or a hive of scholars. It is a quiet, limestone monument to what might have been. You feel a strange sense of peace, a realization that even if the paper burns and the brass is melted, the human curiosity that built this city is indestructible. You've seen the world's first robot theater, its first vending machine, and its first steam turbine. You've walked through the grid, like streets in the cedar, scented library. You are a traveler who has seen the source code of the future written in the language of the past. The waves of the Mediterranean are barely touching the wood of the docks. A sound that is as slow and steady as a heartbeat. You adjust your tunic, the fabric feeling soft and familiar now, and you find a comfortable spot to sit against a fluted column. The transition is almost over. The story has reached the harbor, and the harbor is quiet. You look out toward the horizon, where the sea meets the sky in a line of perfect velvet black, and you realize that you have traveled as far back as a mind can go. The air is turning even cooler now. But it isn't the sharp cold of the wind. It is a soft, heavy coolness that feels like a velvet blanket being drawn over your shoulders. The sounds of Alexandria, the distant clatter of a guard's shield, the lap of the water, the rustle of the palms, are all beginning to stretch out, the gaps between them growing longer and longer. The light of the Pharos lighthouse is no longer a warning to sailors. It is a rhythmic pulse, a gentle, golden glow that matches the pace of your own breathing. Breathe in the scent of the salt and the faint, lingering cedar, and breathe out the noise of the city. The gears in Hero's workshop have all stopped their clicking, and the sand in the automatic theater has finally run through the last hole. The puppets are still, and the stage is dark. You are walking through a city made of moonlight and silence, where every limestone street is a path leading you deeper into the quiet. The scrolls on the shelves are all rolled tight, their secrets safe in the dark. And the nothingness in the pipes is finally at rest. You are floating on a calm sea, the galley of your thoughts drifting away from the docks of the world. The fire beneath the altar has turned to soft, gray ash, and the great doors of the temple are closed, shielding you from anything but the peace of the sanctuary. The genius of the past is a soft hum in your ears, a cradle of brass and fire, carrying you away. You are heavy. You are still. And you are exactly where you are meant to be. The story is finished, the city is asleep, and you are part of the dream now.